What concerns me with the current obsession with happiness is that under the rubric of happiness, all sorts of things that aren't really related are often discussed. So, for example, there are claims that happy people are healthier. Actually, the research doesn't precisely indicate that. What it indicates is that people who have less negative emotion are healthier. And we don't exactly know the direction of causality. I mean, negative emotion is a dimension in and of itself. And people who are high in negative emotion tend to be depressed and anxious. And depression is associated with increased production of a stress hormone, cortisol, and that seems to have very negative consequences over time. It impairs your immune system and makes you more susceptible to obesity and depression and cancer and heart disease. But technically, that's a negative emotion issue. The claim is often made that happy people are more creative, and the evidence for that, again, is very weak. There are a few studies that indicate that if you put people in a state of positive mood, that they can think in a more creative manner, briefly. But the bulk of the personality evidence suggests that creative people are somewhat disagreeable and that they're high in a trait called openness. And openness is a measure of fluidity of thought, and it appears to be fundamentally unrelated to happiness. It might be objected, I suppose, that the right response to negative situations is to consider how they might be made better. And I would agree with that. But the problem is that making things better and being happy are not the same thing unless you decide by definition that they're the same thing, in which case I don't believe that you're speaking within the scientific realm. Because you're not allowed to put vastly differing phenomena in the same box and call them the same if you're a scientist. You can do that in normal conversation. And so, for example, if someone's suffering from a terrible illness, you might determine that aiding them would be an appropriate thing to do. And you might also consider that that would make you feel better. But to call that the pursuit of happiness is merely to be very unclear about the distinction between compassion and joy. And given the state of psychological science at this point, there's absolutely no excuse for failing to make that distinction. I've said that some people will tell you that the purpose of life is to be happy, and those people are idiots. And it was a bit of a rough statement, but what I meant by that, it was actually inspired by a statement by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who was the great critic of the Soviet prison system. And he commented that happiness is something that's done in by the first harsh blow that reality deals you. And I believe this to be the case. There are many circumstances in life where happiness is not only the wrong response, but also where the expectation of happiness as a response will put you, the person attempting to be happy, in absolutely the wrong psychological state to be prepared for what must be done. People are built, so to speak, to experience a very wide range of motivational and emotional states that only bear a tenuous relationship to one another. And the reason for that is that the environment that human beings inhabit is so complex that our adaptation depends on a variety of very finely differentiated responses. And so there is a time to be compassionate, and there's a time to be aggressive, and there's a time to be in pain, and there's a time to be anxious, and there's a time to be joyous, and a time to be satisfied. And the healthy and well-adapted person has a very wide range of finely differentiated responses, which cannot be boiled down to a single dimension, say happiness versus unhappiness. Life is not that simple, and if it was, we'd only have one emotional system. Making happiness the focal point of your life trivializes your experiences, because in order to regard anything as truly important, you also have to regard its loss as truly meaningful. And that means that to open yourself up to experiences of deep meaning also simultaneously means that you have to open yourself up to the possibility of deep hurt and sorrow. At every moment, we're surrounded by what we know and can understand, but outside of that, we're surrounded by all the things that we do not know and cannot understand, and that can manifest themselves at any moment. So we're like small islands of tentative certainty in a massive sea of uncertainty and ignorance. That's our existential condition. It's really our environment. Even from a scientific perspective, it's the environment that we've emerged into and have adapted to. And we have to take that into account when we deal with our lives, because that's the truest nature of our life. It's order in the midst of infinite chaos. The human problem is how to make sense out of the constant interplay between that tentative order and that infinite chaos.